Ready?
It's
Okay.
recording.
Yep. You can just cut it later, I guess. Yep. All right. Hello everyone. Uh, welcome to today's journal club. Uh, my name is Vishaal. I'm a master's student at Jiao Lab at Monash University. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Okay,
Um,
my name is Chuyin, and I'm a PhD student in the same lab.
My name's Chen Chen. I'm a second year PhD student, and I'm also from the same lab.
I'm Mike. I'm a first year PhD student. I'm also from the same lab.
Okay, great. Thank you for the very nice introductions. So today we will be discussing a paper titled The Perception of Auditory Motion in Sighted and Early Blind Individuals. Uh, so a bit of background, it has been established that the visual system has specialized neurons for tracking continuous changes in perception. The paper highlights that visual processing is explained through a motion energy model with inseparable filters, where neurons' selectivity for space changes in relation to time. Okay. Um, However, the equation arises that whether or not auditory processing uses the same filters or they don't. Um, do they use the same inseparable filters or are they in fact separable? So before we continue, very briefly, to define what these separable and inseparable filters are. Separable filters are when a system such as the brain processes spatial and temporal information independently, right? Inseparable is, well, the opposite. The information is very much integrated, and it can capture some complex interactions and so on and so forth. So in the case of auditory processing, it's quite unclear if it involves a dedicated system that tracks continuous changes or if the changes in auditory motion is inferred based on changes at a specific temporal point. So that's what this paper attempts to address. Um, the authors use what is called a psychophysical reverse correlation paradigm to investigate the filters underlying auditory motion discrimination. So the participants were asked to identify the direction of a motion signal. The signal is basically broadband noise coming from either the left or the right in the presence of spatial temporal noise. They then compared the ability of the participants to discriminate motion direction between both sighted and early blind individuals. Okay, so the paper highlights the use of an ideal observer model to assess the reliance of the separable filters, which we will talk about a little bit later. So that is basically the summary in a nutshell, right, of the methods, the results. So they have a few findings. First, both sighted and early blind individuals have separable auditory motion filters, right? The authors created a model to quantify participants' reliance on separable filters for auditory motion processing. Without going too much into the analysis details and everything, the model has a parameter for the separability of the estimated filters, and they found that the filters were indeed equally separable between both sighted and early blind groups. Um, so the next result is early blind individuals exhibited increased sensitivity to auditory motion. Uh, and I believe the authors used a separable Gaussian model with 5 parameters to quantify this perceptual filter tuning. But let's just not go into that detail right now. Okay. Next, early blind individuals exhibited increased sensitivity to auditory motion and reduced susceptibility to noise compared to sighted individuals. So the threshold that they have to detect motion change or motion direction is much lower than those who are sighted. So uh, one other finding is, to summarize overall, when there is a narrow spatial tuning, the non-separable filter model works better, right? But when there is a broad spatial tuning, that the separable filter model works better. And yes, I am not sure if there's anything else that I can highlight. Um, Yeah, I think that's the summary. So yeah, do you guys have anything else to add?
So with the increased performance, with the better performance of the early blind individuals, so I would like to add that you mentioned about sensitivity and better tuning,
Yeah.
but when it translates to behavioral performance, what happens is that compared to early blind individuals, the sighted individuals needs the signal noise, the signal sound to be much louder than the background
Yeah.
sound.
Right.
For them to be able to be like, oh, there's a signal and it's moving. Whereas the early blind individuals, you can tune the signal to be about as loud as or like slightly louder than the background noise, and they can already detect the signal and then detect the motion. So that's the key point of the sensitivity part.
Yeah.
Anyone
Yeah.
else have anything to add?
No, in terms of summary, no.
Yeah, I think that seems to be roughly all of it. There are some details regarding the background section where they mentioned the previous study have tried to investigate these motion after effect in the auditory space, and but it still remained controversial whether the audio motion perception is continuous or discrete and more like a snapshot.
So
Right.
in this case, the snapshot model, which means that they kind of detect the motion of the sounds, like locate the auditory signal in, this at T1 and then here T2, this T3, and then they infer that the sound moved from here to here. And that's the snapshot. Whereas the other one, the non-separable filter prediction, the spatial temporal processing prediction is the
Continuous.
processing of the sound and space, processing of the time and space of the source of the sound was combined together, just like how our visual experience work.
Yep.
And yeah, so previous study couldn't provide clear evidence for any one of the explanation, which is why they're running this experiment. And basically what they found was when we locate the auditory motion, we do stuff like T1, T2, T3, T4, and then we infer that there's a motion from T1 to T4.
Right.
I suppose it's worth highlighting that what we really want to see is the effect of speed on the audio effect, essentially, because whether it's distance or duration alone doesn't seem only suggests that they are separable in some. But if we have a speed, which is the ratio between the duration and distance, and that plays an important role in determining these audio effects, then that would suggest that it is indeed inseparable, the two filters.
Filters are separable?
So can I clarify what you...
Did not, perhaps I didn't explain this very well, but I guess a example would be that when they also was talking about the motion after effect, they mentioned that the effect is both stimulus specific, weaker than visual motion after effect, and that it is dominated by the factors of distance and duration, which is suggesting that it seems to be implying that the two are separable because these two factors are having a very strong effect. But the velocity, which is the ratio between the duration and the distance, does not seem to have as much as strong as an effect. Am I getting the idea, or have I misunderstood?
But can they, even with the separate tuning, you can infer velocity, right? Based on the duration and distance cues. Velocity doesn't have to result from like an inseparable processing of space and time, right? But it would be interesting to see how that so basically how the different mechanism for visual and auditory motion would impact people's performance on detecting the velocity of stimulus. Because if you rely on duration and distance cues, it feels like you are more vulnerable to lagging behind, if you know what I'm trying to say, right? But yeah.
Any other thoughts?
I have like not a question, but something to discuss.
Yeah.
So here they said that early blind patients perform better because to some extent they have even more refined separable filters to processing sounds.
Yeah.
And the reason why they have separable filters for auditory processing in the first place is because you have broad spatial tunings for auditory input. In comparison, for visual input, you have a very fine-grained spatial localization, so that the separate filters are more optimized for a broad spatial tuning of sounds. And what's intriguing me is that if for early blind patients who do not have access to any visual input, in other words, any access to a fine-grainedly localized visual input, wouldn't it be optimal for the brain to instead make the auditory input more fine-grainedly localized? But instead, what the brain is doing for the early blind patients is they develop a more optimal separate filters to work under this broad spatial tuning. So they don't care about the broad spatial tuning is just something that they cannot change, and they just have to work on a better mechanism. But it's quite surprising how the tuning itself, the localization itself does not become more fine-grained to make it more like the visual input.
Well, for localization, I think if I remember correctly from my bachelor course, the localization localization of auditory information relies on the time difference between signal arriving at our 1 year and the other year. And localization of visual cues potentially it's relies on some other environmental cues, right? It's not the same mechanism.
Yeah, but when it goes into the brain, I was thinking maybe the brain can utilize some kind of plasticity.
Yeah, actually, in regards to the plasticity statement that you mentioned, I mean, in the discussion section, there is some mention of sensory reorganization, right, due to visual deprivation in early blind individuals.
Yeah. I know that
So,
story.
yeah, I think I find it very, very interesting. This, I guess, this potential explanation or theory. The fact that visual processing, right? The non-separable filters are because of specialized neurons in the middle temporal area, right? So these, if these then are reorganized to take into the account of auditory processing, they are technically switching from non-separable to separable templates. Like I'm quoting the paper right now, basically. And I think I personally would think that's a more promising explanation for the refinement of not of the filters. So not really like a refinement, but it's like you have more availability,
Um,
I guess, for sensory input. I don't know.
They're still improving the filter itself, but
Yeah.
not like how the
How you mentioned it's more of a
like just directly improve the spatial
you have more
localization.
senses. Yeah,
I'm
basically.
not.
That's even better, right? Because
Yeah.
with the broad spatial localization, what you can do is so compared to visual input, what they mentioned was visual input is so highly with such high resolution that even 1 degree of change can be detected. But auditory motion is much larger in terms of resolution. Maybe change from here to here can be detected, but the source changing from this to this, you couldn't tell. But then visual is like,
Yeah.
so maybe you can like optimal strategy is to improve the localization itself rather than just optimizing the filters.
I think
That's what
there's a biological limit of
Yeah,
how
maybe.
like our ears can detect sound. If it's just biologically not very sensitive, the only thing you can do is to improve the filter instead of growing a more sensitive ears, I suppose.
Yeah, I now
Yeah.
remember the localization of visual information, say a specific spot in our visual field, it's matched with some specific region in our visual cortex. So it's
So
quite
retinotopic map.
yeah, it's quite sensitive.
Okay.
As Max has biological limitation, but for auditory information, it relies on the time difference. So time is localization in auditory system. Then
So
wait. So that would mean that there must be a connection, a correlation or connection in the auditory system, right? When we are detecting auditory information, because time is distance. Well, that is related to distance.
yeah, kind of,
I see
but the main point, yeah, my main point was to say if we rely on the time difference, it can't be too sensitive. Yeah, like if we move just from here to here, the difference is quite small to be detected. That's a part of biological limitation you just said. Yeah.
Yeah, but Mike makes a point. The spatial localization of sound itself relies on time. How is space and time now separated in the filters? That's surprising. Oh,
Yeah, that's a point, yes.
but yeah, maybe they're looking at some higher level. The filters exist in a higher level within the hierarchy, so that they already have separate construct for space and local location and duration. Whereas the lowest level of it is actually both, like all time. Maybe something like that, but they didn't say anything about it, and also don't know much about auditory processing.
Well, but if you look at figure 6, it's you see early blind people are already much more sensitive to these parameters, these filter parameters, than sighted people. Maybe that's kind of optimizing, or say some at least the brain is trying to overcome this biological limitation.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. whether it's the result of practice or the what Vishaal mentioned, the neurological reorganization of a
Yeah,
medial temporal. Because I think they said something about like after 6 hour or 6,000 trials.
It doesn't change much, right?
Yeah,
I think it
6,000 trials. 6
six-
hours of 6,000 trials or something, I remember.
Figure 2, it doesn't change much.
that's 5,000.
Yeah, 1,000 trials per session, 6,000 trials
Yes.
total.
Yeah.
So the basically sighted individuals does not get any better after 6,000 trials, meaning that the early blind individuals must have much more experience than 6 hours of repeated localization of
Oh, yeah,
trials.
yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
Or another possibility, maybe not closely relevant, it's in figure 5. I think figure 5 here, there's a yellow triangle and a gray triangle that show the signal and noise are not presented at the same time. That's what I understand.
Yeah.
There's a difference, and the dots of sighted people are more close to the noise, which is the start
Yes.
of any sound. And early blind people, the early blind dots are closer to the signal. So I think that kind of shows the early blind people can detect what is the signal, or what is the signal, or detect a fine difference between noise and signal, that kind of thing. They are
Yes.
more sensitive.
Mm.
Also, I have a question about that. I don't know if they are doing this deliberately. I mean, playing signal and noise and at different time points. But I wonder if they play signal and noise at the same time, what will happen? That's what I want to know.
So could you repeat that again, sorry, Chuyin? Your question?
Yeah,
Your question
I
again?
wonder what if they play the signal and noise at the same time, and what will happen for this figure 5C.
Okay.
I wonder what it sounds like to begin with.
Yeah, that's that's a potential issue of the auditory study. Like I go to their experimental program, but I can't play the sound like they did in their lab. So, but for visual experiment, we can just try it on our own computer or so.
I imagine it would just make the task more difficult, right? But would it fundamentally change any significant result? I'm uncertain about that.
Maybe the early blind people are still able to do it quite well.
But they will be the same, right? Because the onset time will be the same, so the cluster would be around the same time.
Yes, it makes the analysis more difficult.
Maybe.
But probably wouldn't change much because early blind people are just that good.
Yeah, but sighted people might show a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe the task will be more difficult for sighted people, right?
Yeah, I still wonder what it sounds like. So basically, if you play both the signal noise and the background noise together at the same time from beginning to end, then one possibility is that you're just listening to noise. But then it's also possible that you can tell one stream embedded in that entire back of noise. It goes from here to here, whereas the background noise does not change orientation. So I just wonder what it sounds like. That's all.
I'm sorry, Mac.
Oh, so you continue.
Or I guess they did that because they want participants to be able to separate what is noise and what is signal if they play this at the same time. Probably people will mix them up. That's what I guess. But yeah, empirical question. Yeah.
Also, it would...
I
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah. So I think the background noise, if I'm reading this correctly, the only thing that's really different is the amplitude is randomized across the 10 points for the background noise in a random fashion, while the signal is traveling at a constant speed from one side to another, whether it's to left to right or right to left. So I think the good way to differentiate the two is one is changing systematically, while the background noise is randomly varying across time and space.
Across time and space, that even
It
harder.
doesn't change, it's just there.
Even harder. Okay. And they kind of mentioned another kind of noise, which I don't understand the difference. It's called broadband noise, and which is consisted in both signal motion and background noise. I don't know why, and I don't know the difference here.
My understanding of it is like, when you're plotting some of the data, you add jitters to it.
Yeah. And again, we can't try it, so we don't know what they sound like.
You email them and ask them to upload the parent.
No, it requires some special equipment too, right? Some
Yeah,
special
this one does. I mean, it's possible to do online experiments because you can just use a headphone to listen to it. Because another auditory experiment I've read before, also published on this journal, they have all their sound clips stimuli available freely online. And you can just listen to them, and then they are kind of auditory illusions. Just by listening to the clips on your own laptop, the illusion effect is already pretty strong.
Okay.
Yeah, it's possible to make these stuff online.
Right. Here, I would say I checked their experiment code, and I don't see how we can try.
You did?
I mean, there are no sound file, like there are no MP3 files or WMV files. They are just IM files. So I guess the sound is coded by MATLAB.
Yeah, you have to run the experiment.
So I think it's on MATLAB and Psych Toolbox or something like that.
Yeah, Psych Toolbox is a toolbox for MATLAB. Yeah.
Better than the online experiment programs.
Right.
But sadly we cannot use it online. So.
No, we probably can't use MATLAB
online.
No,
we can use Psych Toolbox online. Another very interesting point that comes to mind is regarding how for human beings, the auditory processing has this broad localization resolution, henceforth the separate filters and all that. And it brings back to it reminds me of a very traditional question in consciousness. So what is it like to be a bat? So the origin of this question comes from how bats can rely on ultrasounds signals in the environment, and they navigate just like people with sights, right? And on the other hand, their vision is very bad. They can only see a little bit of light. So in a sense, the ultrasound for them is like visual input. Their auditory experience is probably a bit similar to our vision, right? I wouldn't say it's completely the same because we never know what is it like to be a bat. But drawing from this experiment's finding, do you think it's possible that the bats have this fine-grained localization of auditory input?
Yeah, honestly,
and
I would
then
say that.
they also have non-separate filters. So ultrasound, the auditory experience of ultrasound is like our vision.
I mean, much like this paper when author is talking about neurological basis, I would assume that if there's a non-separate filter for bats ultrasound detection, there will be some kind of neurons that specifically code for I don't know, but
Yeah.
what would it be? There's non-separate ultrasound filter for
I mean,
bats.
if the theory is right, you know that possible explanation about the sensory reorganization, changing the neurons from a non-separable to a separable template, right? I think it's very likely that bats can have a separable to non-separable template. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. Yeah.
Also, how do they receive those ultrasounds? They don't use something like ear. Like the structure is very different from our ears, if I remember correctly. So from the ground up, they are built for this kind of
Yeah.
navigation.
Well, the idea is to say, well, similar, I guess. Well, vision is light and reflection of light.
Yeah.
Ultrasound is sound and reflection
They
of
beep beep the sound out and they get the reflection back.
We
Oh,
already
hopefully-
have sonar, which is built based on bats. So
Yes.
maybe if we spend some time to do our research to find out what sonar will perform, and maybe that can give us a hint on how bats are performing. Yeah.
Well, we can just get a bunch of bats into animal labs. But it's very hard to train them to do any task, though. I guess that's why
Yeah,
nobody
so
actually
sonar is easier.
Yeah.
This may be a silly question, but what if the bats is deaf or cannot receive ultrasound for some reason?
Extinct.
No, on the individual level, not on the
Well,
species
they
level.
may have better sights, though.
Then they will
see
most
things
likely be blind.
easier.
I don't know. Yeah.
Like, do you think their sights would also be separable, much like our, well, as shown by this paper, our auditory system?
Well, I mean, they have different brains, so things may not have to change in the same way. But I mean, in the general sense, they probably have to have a better sight to be able to survive at all.
Right.
But I mean, their sight's probably worse than our auditory system, right?
Yeah, so I guess they will simply die.
They'll simply
They
die.
can't
Okay,
survive.
right.
There's no
Or
way around it.
if they can survive by having a better visual system, that will lead to a new species for after a long
All
time.
seeing bats.
Yeah.
Well, if that's the case, then bats won't live in caves. They will like go into forests. They live like under the sun. They're like birds. Because without light, they cannot see things, so it's impossible for them to live in caves at least.
Yeah. Or oh no, it's different from flies. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or opinions?
Not for me.
For me, maybe a very broad question. It's like maybe I'm not specialized in audition or this field. I don't really get why this separable or non-separable system issue is so important.
I think I don't know. Honestly, I don't have much knowledge in this field either.
Yeah, the authors didn't give much explanation or extension on this issue, like why this question is important and how the results can be applied to multiple fields.
So based on my understanding, this might also translate to the neuron structure, I would say, but I don't know how valid my answer is or how correct my answer is. Because you see, when it comes to non-separable filters, for example, it reflects non-separable tuning in neurons in the middle temporal area, right? So if you have separable filters, it may also reflect separable tunings. So this also technically reflects neuron properties. And neuron
like
properties reflects how your perception changes. And that reflects how your conscious experience changes. So yeah.
Yeah, also the first two sentences or first three sentences of this entire paper. Understanding the motion of objects in the environment is a fundamental task of sensory processing, which
yeah,
is why we must understand how the sensory system processes auditory motion.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. This motion of objects includes both visual and auditory,
Right.
Yeah.
right? Okay.
You hear the
Yeah,
car,
hear
you
something.
have to dodge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, because when I first read it, I assume it means visual. We see things moving. That's very important. Yeah, of course. Okay, it didn't. The audition didn't come to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you are kids, you at home watching, like you alone at home watching TV instead of doing homework, and then you hear footsteps. The localization of the footstep and estimation of how much
Oh.
time it takes for the footstep to arrive at your door is very, very important information. It's crucial for your survival, isn't it?
Yeah. That's a very good example. Yes.
Right?
Oh, yeah. And that's why so many animals evolved to have very quiet sound of steps. Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
Okay. So I guess that concludes today's Journal Club presentation. Right. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone,
Thank you.
and we
Thank
will
you.
see you guys on the next one.